This tutorial is a bare-bones one intended to get you up and running with a working DevExpress gauge control. Further tutorials will elaborate on other features, such as design and extra elements, but for the time being consider it as a Hello World demo. The only assemblies we need to reference for the sake of this short tutorial are these: DevExpress Extra Gauges Win and System Windows Forms. I've left them with the default full path since I'm releasing the source as is, but I strongly suggest using logical names, as will be demonstrated in upcoming tutorials. First of all, let's watch a pre-written program in runtime. We here see an empty control, and let's add a default gauge to it. We're getting the value of the arc scale, and we're able to change the value and move the needle. Now let's look at the code. First, we will select a .NET variable based on a class with object type DevExpress Extra Gauges Win Gauge Control, as we can see here. This is the actual control that is placed on the form and is seen here with the square border. Then we will add a circular gauge to the control by invoking the addCircularGauge method on it and assigning the result to a circular gauge variable seen here. Next, we will invoke the addDefaultElements method on the circular gauge object, which will populate it with default arc scale, needle, labels, big ticks and small ticks. The last .NET variable we have to select is an arc scale component, into which we will cast the first and only scale from the scales collection of our newly created circular gauge object. This is done so we can get and set its value property. The needle that was added by invoking the addDefaultElements method is by default attached to our sole scale, so setting the value property of the scale will move the needle, and we needn't define a variable for the needle element. A reference to a needle object will only be needed in a scenario where more than one needle is attached to the scale, at which case the value property of the needle will be handled rather than the value property of the arc scale.
That's all, folks. Interesting.